next technique I teach is deadly aggression. Now, this is a defense against an opponent approaching to put on a flank headlock. So the opponent's coming up sort of from our 730 area, sort of out of the obscure zone, and they're going to try to get us in this headlock. Now, at this level, I teach this as a preemptive defense, but it's going to tie right into some of the things we're going to be doing later with techniques like escaping death, grasp of death, where our opponent's actually setting some of these headlock and choke attacks. But at this point, he's coming up and he's trying to put our hand on us. And some of the defenses I teach at this beginner level are preemptive defense, and we're going to cover that in some of our weapon techniques as well. So as he comes up and tries to put that hand on us, we sense this guy coming. How does that happen? It could happen a lot of ways. My head's turned, I hear him, I see a reflection across from me. However it is, I see this guy coming, I sense him coming, and as he approaches, I'm going to step away from his attempt, and I'm going to bring my hands up and just clap. Okay, now what I'm trying to do here is create a bracing strike with one hand behind his head, controlling his head, and the other hand coming up and smashing him right in the face. Okay, so he comes up and throws that arm up, I step away from it and I strike. From there I'm going to grab his arm if it's still there, bring it up over my head so I have armbar control, and just push him away. Okay, and that's the entirety of the technique. It's very simple, very quick technique. He comes up, boom, I'm controlling his arm at this point, and I'm using that arm to move my opponent. That's, again, we're going to drill each of these steps. We're also going to spend some time practicing this attack. I want the students to understand this is not somebody coming up and putting their arm around your shoulder. Okay? This is an attempted flank headlock, which can become attempted chokes and strangles, or committed chokes and strangles. So we want to get ahead of that right away. And as we go through the system and revisit this concept, we're going to see the opponent attempt, we're going to see the opponent get the headlock, we're going to see the opponent strike into the headlock, and we're going to see the opponent get the headlock and drive us down. Right? And we're going to see him turn some of that into chokes. This also plays into the last technique we worked, which was escaping the bear, where we talked about the need to pin that arm so he doesn't get up into that choking range or that headlock range. So as our opponent comes up, strike, right here we're controlling that arm over our head, and we're going to practice armbar control. Moving that opponent around, controlling the elbow, controlling the wrist, controlling the shoulder, using it to drive him down into the ground, to drive him around, and these are all just basic movement drills we'll do. Get a good armbar on the guy, move him around the room. Now, one of the other things we practice at this level that isn't in a technique is our basic arm hold, okay, inside and outside arm hold. This is one of the basic beginner grappling, stand-up grappling techniques I practice with students. I think it has so many applications. We're going to tie this back in later into our weapons defense. We're going to tie this into a lot of our different technique defenses, our stand-up grappling. This basic inside and outside arm hold is a concept that we're going to revisit a lot. And we're going to touch on it here with this arm control. Now, this isn't quite the same as if we had him all the way into the arm hold, but we can easily transition to that from here. So our opponent comes up, we're hitting him here, and again, this is not a complex strike. This is just hands to the face, right? Anything going into the face is very distracting, is very disruptive to your opponent's attack, especially if he's unprepared for it. If you understand that your opponent can attack your face and you're prepared for it, and again, this is something we'll practice, then you can sort of fight through that, right? And we'll practice going for the eyes, digging out the eyes, striking at the eyes, and defending against that by clenching the eyes, turning the head control, head position to make that more difficult for our opponent. But if your attacker isn't prepared for that, if he hasn't done those drills, then just putting your hands up in his face is going to be extremely disorienting to him, because we have a natural instinctive inclination to turn away from anything coming into the eyes, right? On an instinctive level, we know that this is dangerous and needs to be prevented. We have to protect ourselves from that. So anything coming up here like that, we have an instinct to try and get away from it. As he turns away, that's going to take away from his headlock attack, right? And even if he doesn't turn away, hitting a guy in the face is a good way to start a defense. So as he comes up and tries to throw that arm up over, again, we're stepping out of it, okay? And that's part of it too, is understanding. We've talked about this earlier in techniques like delayed sword. Distance is your best friend, right? Distance is your best friend. Now, that doesn't always mean creating distance. Sometimes that means closing the distance. But in this case, we're kind of practicing a theme here of stepping out of control techniques, right? Our opponent is trying to close the distance, get control, and we want to get away from that, okay? So as he comes up, we step out of it, and that right there can be enough. Maybe I step out of it, rear kick, right? Maybe I step out of it, turn and get my hands up, right? There's a lot of things I could do. At this point, as I step out of it, he's still close enough that I can smash his head, right? Now, later techniques that we're going to learn, I've got the collar control, I've got all kinds of things I can do from there. If I can get my hand up over the top, I can bowling ball him, I can grab an ear, anything I can do to control the head. Grab the ponytail, right? I like to tell a story about a good friend of mine who was attacked in a mugging, and he had long hair, and the first thing he knew he was under attack, a guy came up on him from behind, grabbed his ponytail, pulled him to the ground, and started putting the boot in, right? And that was his first warning that, oh no, I'm being mugged, I'm being attacked. So that's something we'll talk about in the later levels. That's something we'll drill, grabbing somebody like that and pulling them to the ground and attacking, and they have to defend and get out of that position. So all these things we're doing here, learning how to get the hands up, learning how to move the arm, learning how to step out, these are the foundational building blocks that we're going to continue to expand upon throughout the system. And that's part of how I use the kenpo system. Each of these things is a discussion, it's a jumping off point. So yes, learning the physical technique, no matter what technique it is, that's important. But to me, that's really just the start of the discussion we're going to have. And so I use the techniques and the patterns, the sets and the forms as a way to sort of bookmark, okay, at this point in the student's education, we want to have this discussion. And at this point in the student's education, we're going to revisit that earlier discussion and add another layer to it, right? So this is a complete defense in and of itself. Getting out, striking the head, arm control, moving the opponent away. But it's also the beginning of learning a wider and deeper base of movement and action and interaction that we're going to continue to explore throughout the entirety of their training. So we strike the head away, we know we can do all these other things, we get the armbar control, and we've practiced all the manipulations and moving the opponent around, and again, at later levels, there's all the traps and breaks and vertical shoulder locks and takedowns and all those sorts of things. For the beginner, it's enough for him to see an opponent approaching, whoa, boom, get him off of me, push him away, escape, right? So again, deadly aggression, for me, and this is something I've done with several techniques, you'll see this again, like I said, in our weapon techniques, is I've taken things that we practice later in a more complex way, and I've broken them down in a simpler fashion for beginner students. This particular technique I actually picked up from another kenpo instructor that I trained with and taught with for a while. I liked it, so I brought it in, started teaching it to my students at this point in their curriculum. You'll notice as we continue to go through these videos that in addition to the EPAC techniques, I've also added several techniques that either I've picked up from other instructors, I've picked up from other arts, or that I've added to sort of smooth out the progression base so that we don't start with a really complex knife technique, for instance. We have something much, much simpler that we do at the beginner level to start to have that discussion, to start to train knife defense, to start talking about evasion and weapon control and all those sorts of things before we get to some of the more complex techniques that we're going to do later. So, deadly aggression, he approaches, strike at the face, get the arm off of you and control with the arm bar, push the opponent away, create space. And at that point, if I need to get back into my striking mode, I can. If I need to escape, I can. If, I need to chase the guy or get away or get attention or get help, whatever I need to do, I can do because I'm not getting choked out, right? So that's deadly aggression. Let me know if you guys have any questions.